We are about to record this meeting, as we do with all of our public meetings. And I will repeat that this is a subcommittee meeting for the Re-envisioning Our Public Schools School Committee subcommittee meeting on Wednesday, February 21st, 2024. And we are calling the meeting to order at now 4:02 p.m. I'm going to ask that all of the members of the committee indicate that they're here when I call your name. Committee Chair Sexton, I am here. Member Childs?
I am here.
And Member DeSorger?
Here.
And we are also joined by the Superintendent Christine DeBarge and Assistant Superintendent Karen Patnode. Welcome and thank you for joining. And we do have a member of the public here with us, sort of giving ourselves a few more minutes so that the public can join if any more folks were going to. But we do have a spot on our agenda to move into public comment. Just out of, for Robert's Rules orders, I will say to you all right now, this is my first time chairing a meeting of any kind for our school committee. So if I get it wrong, many apologies, but I'm gonna try to do the best we can. And if I skip a vote, gently remind me and we can hold as many votes as we want. But until then, public comment, and I wanted to give our sole member of the public the opportunity to share if they feel so inclined.
Does that mean me?
That means you, yes.
I know there's a couple of other people trying to connect, but their Zoom has not been updated, so they're probably not going to be able to check in. But other than what I said the other night at the school committee meeting, I'm just here to listen, to drink it all in, be supportive, provide constructive ideas, based on my familiarity. But other than that, this is just going to be a learning experience for me. And so I'll just sit back, and I've muted my face, so I'm totally incognito.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
Happy to have you on the meeting as part of our public process. Appreciate
Excuse me, just for clarification, can I get the public participant's name for the minute?
We need your name and your address.
Oh, sure. My name is Kate Broughton, Broughton, 94 Meridian Street, and that's about 3 houses up from the Green River School. So that's my primary interest, is just to kind of see where things are. And if you want to ask me questions, but I'm just here to basically observe. So.
Great. Well, again, thank you for joining us. It's about 5 after. I want to be sympathetic to the folks whose Zooms were updating, but I also want to be mindful of our agenda and that there is also a city council meeting tonight, which I'm assuming we are all also very excited about. Okay, so the next item that I had on the agenda was reconvening the committee. And this was just sort of a place for us. It doesn't have to take, it can take as long as we need it to take, but just to make sure that we all understand what we're doing and why, and what stage of the process we're at, because I think that will be helpful to remind ourselves where we're at as we make any decisions that need to get made. So as I see it, the purpose of our subcommittee is to solicit public opinion, carefully study, and make recommendations on the use of our public school facilities and infrastructure, including how we divvy up where students go. That now that we are in a place where those where the recommendations were ultimately brought to the school committee and then voted upon, that we are in a stage now of making any decisions that need to get made in order to carry out that initial vote, as well as be supportive in the efforts of reaching out to students, parents, and the community about how this process is going to be undertaken. So that's being supportive of the vision of the administration and helping them carry out any plans for smoothing the process of students getting from one place to wherever they are now to wherever they're going to go in the future, to help do that. Does that sound about right? to everybody else who's here who has a part in making these decisions. Is there any piece of what we're doing together that is either unclear or I didn't mention and you think that I should have mentioned it?
No.
I like to give good pauses to just weed out all the people who are uncomfortable with the pause and will say something, anything. Great. Can I know that this will be slightly out of protocol and out of order, but could I get the opinion of the other committee members on allowing or giving the opportunity for the other two community people who have joined to see if any of them would like to give a public comment?
I'm all for it. I think one of the benefits of the subcommittee meetings is that we don't have to be so formal in order to maintain order.
Fantastic. Saw general affirmative from Ginny.
I concur. I always like to have members of the public have a chance to speak.
Great. Thank you both for that. So I just want to recognize there have been 3 community members now with Nancy who have joined in the past few minutes. And we've given one opportunity for public comment, but we are reopening that temporarily just to ensure that you do have the opportunity to speak, because we had heard that your Zooms may have been updating, as they do sometimes. So with that, could we get you to put your name in the chat if you would like to get on stack to speak? And when you speak, can we get your name, where you live, and then you will have 3 minutes to make your comment. Okay, I see Jesus. So we'll do Jesus followed by Nancy and Meg. I see that you're here just to listen. Thank you for joining. Jesus, you've got 3 minutes.
Sorry, I got lost I mean, my comment's basically just going to be a repetition of my comment, more or less from the school committee, which is just having an interest in learning more information about the decommissioning process for the Green River School, and that if there's a possibility to advocate for, I guess there's a loan on the school that's tied to it being a school that would need to be, I think, forgiven by the state in order to move forward with it as housing or even something else. So learning more about that process, being able to, eventually loop some local legislators in so that we can try to advocate for that would be great. So mostly here to listen.
Great, thank you. Nancy, can I get your name and your address?
Nancy Hazard, 30 Spring Terrace, Greenfield. And I'm here, Jesus just said everything I needed to say. I'm here to learn more about the Green River School and with the hope that it can be decommissioned and that it can be moved forward into so that it can be used for a purpose other than being a school. And ideally that the city doesn't have to pay back the loan, but that's the dream. So thank you. I'm here to, hopefully I will hear the answer to that tonight.
All right. Thank you very much. Seeing no other interest in public comment, I'm sorry, we can't really respond to what's going on in the chat. We only use that for sort of a record keeping purpose. So if you put comments, I can't really see them. So I have a sort of another, would you all support if we moved that item 5, which is on our current agenda around the Green River School property, moved it up, talked about it right now, and maybe addressed some of these concerns?
I'm in favor.
I'm good.
Great. All right, moving on. We are now closing the public comment portion, and we will be turning to talk about the Green River School. Dr. DeBarge, can you give us a brief overview of where we are with that property?
Well, there's not much to actually share at this point. I have the documentation that needs to be completed. That's a goal, to get it done during this school vacation. And, you know, outside of that, I will be in communication with the Department of Ed regarding the process for moving Green River from a school held property to, does it remain a school-based property? Does it move to being a city property for decision making by the city? So we don't really know that. And I think until that piece is clarified, you know, we can't really talk about what, if anything, the schools would want done with the property or the city would want done. Because right now there's lack of clarity about who in fact would end up holding Green River, so to speak. There is a loan. It was signed, it was accepted. The documentation was signed by Mayor Martin. It was, I don't have it in front of me. It was just over $1 million. And there is criteria in the documentation about that Green River needs to be used as an educational facility for 50 years. And failure to have Green River be an educational facility for 50 years could kick in the requirement for a prorated amount of the loan to be paid. But there is some language in it that is suggestive to me that there is some flexibility. However, MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, basically said, you have to fill out the paperwork before we'll talk about anything else. So we'll just have to fill out the very comprehensive paperwork, which has been a little bit challenging when schools are running.
Imagine so.
Yeah, don't generally have a stretch of time during a populated school day. So that's really where we are. So no, not really even any conversation about Green River until we find out where it will be held at the end of the discussion.
Do either of the other school committee members have questions about Green River School?
I don't think I do, because it sounds like we're in the holding pattern until we submit our paperwork.
Great. So eventually, once that paperwork gets in and they do whatever they need to do on their end to process it and get back to us, at that point, it becomes a conversation then that gets sort of ratcheted, kicked up, back up to some joint decision-making body between the schools and the city to decide who's ultimately going to keep care of it. Is that what I heard?
That's what I believe. I don't have confirmation of that, but I believe that is where the next step will go. But I am waiting on confirmation of that. But it seems to me to be a reasonable step, which reasonable doesn't always equate to what will be. So, but that's kind of where we are and where I believe we will be going.
Great. Well, then we look forward to working on that with you as it continues. And thank you very much for your diligence in moving it forward and taking on the grunt work that not everyone wants to do.
That's all right. We'll get it done.
Much appreciated. All right, so that closes that agenda item. We are proceeding right along. I believe that takes us to sort of what I considered the main meat of the evening, which is, or the main cauliflower, depending on your persuasion, The discussion about what the next steps are vis-a-vis redistricting as per the vote that was taken at the end of the last school committee session prior to the election of a couple of us. And so, again, if you wouldn't mind indulging us, Christine, if you could give us an overview of where that sits and what you need from us.
So where we are is that there were some decisions made. One was that intra-district choice would stop. So prior to my arrival, there was no real strong language in policy. It just said that exceptions could be made by the superintendent to assignment of students to schools. What that became operationally was what we refer to as intra-district choice, where families could request to have their children attend a school that was not their assigned school because of geography within Greenfield. When I got to Greenfield, I only approved intra-district choice applications for incoming kindergartners who would still have a sibling at their requested school. We administratively had talked about the impact that intra-district choice long-term has had on class sizes, specifically at Four Corners. And so I see I'm flickering. I don't know why that is. So I was only allowing that for incoming siblings. School committee voted to stop any new incoming intra-district choice, but to allow students who were already accepted into a school that was not their neighborhood school to basically age out. So there are students who are in all of our schools, despite the belief or the statements that suggest only Four Corners has intra-district students. That's not the case. All 3 elementary schools have intra-district choice students. So they will be allowed to age out until they get to 5th or 6th. Well, yeah, 5th or 6th grade, depending the age when they move out of elementary. The other side of that is that siblings now, our current registering kindergarten class is not allowed to move into the school where their siblings may be if it is an intra-district choice request. So, every decision that gets made has consequence in some direction or another. So while students are allowed to age out, some siblings may not be allowed to attend the school where their siblings have already been accepted intra-district choice. The second piece of that, well, a second vote or a third vote, actually, I think those were 2, was that for the 2024-2025 school year, I'm going to ask Karen to double check my year. The lines were going to be drawn 25-26. Stacy, when you and I had this conversation, I messed up the years prior. So for the 2025-2026 academic year, the district would redraw school attendance lines so that the makeup of each elementary school better reflected the makeup of Greenfield as a whole in terms of diversity. So the challenge that we now come to when you asked what do we need you to do, one of the biggest pieces that I need the subcommittee and then the school committee to think about is we have a group of kindergartners who will be enrolling next month who may, the following school year, have the potential to have to change schools if their neighborhood happens to fall in a different catchment area. So the committee needs to consider whether you will move up the redrawing of lines to for this school year, or will you allow students who have registered and are attending a school to stay and age out of that school, even if the lines get redrawn and their home would now be assigned to a different elementary school. So I can make that much more pragmatic. If I am a little kid living on ABC Street, and right now I go to Federal, if I enroll in kindergarten, next year, if ABC Street gets realigned to Four Corners, do I have to move, or will you let me age out? Much like the same process we have right now for our students who are intra-district choice. So then the subsequent question to that is, will we provide transportation for the students who we've redrawn lines and then created a new school for them if the committee lets them age out of their current school? And that is clear as mud.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
So Superintendent DeBarge, first I was wondering if
Yes.
you might give us the numbers that are in each one of the 3 elementary schools. And secondly,
Karen might have them. I don't have the
okay.
current enrollment.
That's okay. That really isn't what I need for my question, truthfully. That was more of curiosity.
Okay.
However, would it be possible that, because I actually would not like a little child. I would not like my own child or my grandchild to have to start in a school that I knew was going to change and then move them the next year. That is my opinion.
Mhm.
And yet I listen to the meetings and I understand. Would it be possible to, start that child in the school that we knew that they were going to be in, even though we weren't starting the whole redistricting? Or is it your thought process that we should be doing changing of those lines earlier? I just think we have to think about those little kindergarteners starting off. And I wonder how many children that really, how many children is that going to involve? And I think that we should be careful and teach and treat each one of those children as if they were our own.
So I do believe Karen has some numbers that may or may not respond to your question. So I'll let her look. But I think the challenging part of this is regardless of when a change occurs, there is potential for families to be in 2 different buildings. So to answer your question, if you were to allow, say, I'm a kindergartner living on ABC Street and my siblings are already enrolled at Federal Street because that's the neighborhood. But next year, ABC Street will be routed to Four Corners. The kindergarten student could go to Four Corners, but the 2 siblings are still at Federal because that's their school. So I'm not sure that eliminates challenges other than the kindergartner won't have to move. But I think the bigger question is, do you allow the 3rd and 4th graders or whoever the siblings are at Federal to stay, or do you make them move?
See that Anne has raised a hand.
So I think that instead of just the kindergartners, we do need to focus also on the kids who are not in the school they've choiced into but will be moved out, because I think we have a serious favoritism problem if we're going to say that these families are allowed to be grandfathered but these families don't get a choice. I think we need to come up with a way of structuring this that is fair, even though it might be logistically complicated, because otherwise it is clear favoritism to say this group of kids doesn't have to move schools because that's too traumatic and that's too big of a transition. But these kids, whatever. I think we have to make sure that we're fair to all of the kids and we aren't giving one group special treatment. Is there a way for us to come up with not hard numbers, but rough figures of how many kids are choicing at each school and how many kids are being moved from each school? Like not hard numbers because that would be impossible, but just a rough ballpark.
Karen, do you have numbers that would address Ann's question?
Yeah, and again, this is ballpark, and I think, Anne, you're correct. I don't think it's just kindergarten you have to worry about. I think you could have a family that moves to Greenfield tomorrow and they could have a third grader, and we would be asking that same student to do the same thing. So I appreciate that comment that, you know, equity and conscious awareness of who we're affecting here is not just our little babies coming into kindergarten for the first time. It could be just a student moving in. Right now, approximately about 40 students at Federal Street who have Federal Street as their home school would be affected by the redrawing of lines if you forced them to move to a new home school when those lines are redrawn. And you have about 22 at Newton who, when you redraw lines, some would go to Federal Street and some would go to Discovery. So you kind of have a mix split as to where they would get relocated. And this is at grades, all grades. This isn't just our incoming kindergarten. And as you know, we just started kindergarten registration. So our numbers and our data on that is just tiny right now. You know, we only have, I think, about 50 students identified that are actually registered, but that obviously is going to increase. So, you know, I think also with the moves, you have to think about if you're going to force those whose homeschool switches because of the redrawn lines to move, we would really have to seriously think about class sizes at some of the schools that they're moving into, because the bubbles would increase, you know, where we've talked about trying to keep 2 2s and 2 2s of each grade level at every building. We're pretty equitable in disbursement. You know, Newton right now has 180 kids, Federal has 185, and Four Corners has 210. So, you know, we're pretty evenly distributed. And I think if we have these huge bubbles of moving and shifting 40 to 50 kids throughout grade levels, that creates another problem. So just more things to think about.
How many children would move at, I'm sorry, I didn't raise my hand. How many children would move at Four Corners?
So the catchment line would be, they would be the receiving school for the new redrawn line, not streets that actually would be moving. So their grandfathered kids, as far as I could see from enrollment currently, that doesn't mean there could be a street or two here where there's a family that moves in or something. But currently, they actually would be the school that's going to receive more kids because of the redrawn lines, unless you grandfather those kids that are attending their homeschool, even when the lines are redrawn, as the school of origin, I guess, is the best way to put it.
So let me just make sure that I've got our options in my mind. One, we could say, sorry, there's absolutely nothing we can do, and adopt an attitude of no flexibility whatsoever, which I do not believe is what any of us would like to do, just based on what I've heard. But we could do it. I mean, it's always an option to sort of do nothing or take the path of least resistance. There's letting the kindergartners age out of their current homeschool, which would be not the school that they would otherwise go to if we followed the boundaries. So we could let the kindergartners age out, which is the same policy we adopted for intra-district choice. Am I correct in thinking that there's also a third option of redrawing the boundaries this year rather than next year, like the 24-25 year as opposed to the 25-26, or is that basically we are too far we are too close in order to make that viable, and would that even solve a problem?
My opinion, and certainly Karen could have a different perspective. I don't think logistically it's too late. It might be challenging for families to think about a change of school at this point, because the school committee meeting, as you know, wouldn't be until March. So we wouldn't be communicating out to families until at least the end of March. And that could be challenging. But the question would still remain. Do you let the students who are already in their school of origin age out, or do you force everyone to move to the schools based on the newly drawn lines? I think no matter when you move the lines, that question will remain.
I
And-
think if we have already decided that one group, the choice group, gets to stay at the school they started, then to say other people have to move and don't get a choice would be preferential treatment that we would not be able to defend. So if we made the rule for one group, it needs to be the rule for all the groups.
In principle, I am in agreement with that. I would also like to understand what the implications of that decision are, for staffing, for class numbers, for, like how, for the same reasons that we were wrestling with that decision for intra-district choice. I would like to know what the impact of that's going to be for this redrawn boundary decision as well.
So again, I'm going to look at Karen to interject but really the numbers, if the committee allows students to age out, no different than allowing students at Four Corners to remain, or any school to remain if they did intra-district choice, those are the numbers we know now. So our staffing is really based on those students being in the buildings they're in. So we know those staffing levels. The only challenge that I see is that at some point, which I don't know if it would be this year or next year, I think it would be next year, if siblings choose to stay in their school of origin, any younger incoming siblings will have to go to the redrawn line school. No different than what is happening with the students who are in a school through intra-district choice. At some point, you have to say, you live in this area, you must register in this school. The option, as it is now for our students who are in a building through intra-district choice, if their younger sibling currently enrolling is not able to attend that school, the family does have the ability to take all of the siblings and put them in their neighborhood school. That is an option. So that problem is going to occur no matter when you draw the line, so to speak. Karen, is there any other thought with that?
Well, I think the transportation piece then also has to be played in if you're thinking budgetarily, what is going to cost the district, because, if you're going to allow students who are in their school of origin to remain there, even if that school changes with the redrawn lines, but then have the incoming kindergartners next year have to go to the school that their redrawn line is, you're probably going to need at least one other bus, if not, I'm guessing really right now. And
We don't
that
know.
transportation piece has to also be a decision you make. And if you're going to continue to provide transportation.
Which is, if I can piggyback on what Karen said, that's a piece that I hope to bring to the committee in March around transportation in general. Because right now we have a situation where the school committee policy states transportation will be provided for students, greater than 1.5 miles. But we have some students who are within the 1.5 miles who are still getting transported. So the committee, I think, will need to make a decision about, do you follow the policy as written, or do you change the policy? Because right now we have students, I'll say, who are, a mile away, who walk. And we have students who are a mile and a quarter away, who get a bus, and then students one house past that who have to walk. So there are exceptions within the mile and a half. And I think the committee needs to just think about that and either change it, either implement the policy as written, rewrite the policy, or shorten the distance for busing. But that decision will be combined with the decision on this.
Mhm.
And I would need to ask Kismeskis, who is our next year's bus company, because you folks voted on the contract, to basically take the numbers as best they can and run them.
Yeah, I think I would need to see that information before I could make the decision. Anne, you have your hand?
I have another transportation question that will just make everything messier. So my understanding is that when you do the choice school, your family is responsible for that transportation. So we know that the choice families do have the ability to self-transport. But if we allow kids who are not choice to grandfather and stay at their school, and they are currently riding a bus, would they lose the bus access? And therefore, if their family can't provide transportation, would they not actually be able to take advantage of being grandfathered?
This, I think you just restated the exact question I was trying to pose to you, and I don't know if I did it well. That is the exact question, and that we'd like the committee to consider. If we allow them to grandfather into their school of origin based on lines, will the committee continue to transport those students based on the fact that the committee has moved lines? They have not made a choice. We've made the choice for them. So do you continue to transport? Do you transport if they continue to live a mile and a half outside of the school area? Some students may end up less than a mile and a half from the new school. So, it's.
And then
It's
we've got the other
unfortunately
fairness piece of if we're transporting the kids who did not choice but have been moved but they're staying, then do we also need to transport the people who were choice from the get-go, whose agreement had always included that they would be the ones providing their own transportation?
Well, I guess for my opinion, it's not my decision, but my opinion is the choice aspect, that if families elected to request a school outside of their catchment area, we have not provided transportation. The families that we are talking about are being told you're going to have your school moved, but the committee could decide to transport if a family says, no, I'm going back to my neighborhood school, even though I would be allowed to stay at this school. Those folks would get transported. So you can do it either way.
I suppose my next question is, how long would it take for us to get some basic numbers of what the increased cost would be, what the new bus routes would have to be?
I can reach out to Kismeskis and ask them to rerun, keeping in mind we're using what we believe to be the new catchment areas, and we would be using current students, which may or may not reflect who's there when the time comes, but we can try to get a good picture. I can hope to have it, I'll reach out to them tomorrow and ask if they can do that. Certainly with a hope that they'd have it well prior to the school committee meeting. But I can certainly forward any information if it comes in, or I can reach out to Stacy and see if we would have the ability to get a new subcommittee in prior to the full school committee.
Go for it, Ginny.
Okay, so I think I'm missing something here that I don't understand. You said, or somebody said at the beginning, when this all comes to fruition, 40 children from Federal Street were going to be affected and 22 from Newton were going to be affected in that they would be moving. Okay. But we didn't think any people from Four Corners were going to be moving. And yet Four Corners has the most students. So no children from Four Corners that are currently there are going to be moving when we redistrict? Or did I miss that part? Is there something I'm not understanding?
So the highlighted streets that we had originally run for the redrawn lines, when you go through roughly who lives where and what grades, those students live in areas that currently attend Federal Street or Newton and then would be moved to Discovery School, or some from Newton would be moved to Federal based on the street changes. So if you decide to change streets in the redrawing, that would create a whole new problem because we'd have to figure out that. But according to the, I don't know how long ago that was done, Christine, maybe a year ago.
Close, yeah.
The people affected would be moving from Federal or Newton to other schools, not from Discovery.
The issue right now is that all of our students who live in housing areas are routed to Federal and Newton. That has been sort of the point of discussion in the community, that Four Corners is not a diverse population. And so that the redrawing of lines would result in the streets for Leiden Woods to be rerouted to attend Four Corners. And students in that neighborhood currently attend the other schools. So
A follow-up, if I may, Chair.
Yeah.
I was following this and I definitely understood what the problem was. I'm just looking at the numbers in the end. And I understood that there were certain, I understood the whole inequity issue. But I'm just listening to this and I'm thinking, well, if that's happening, it sounds like in the end, once we do this, that there's going to be a lot more children possibly at Four Corners. That's where I was going with this.
I just caught up to you. The issue being the redrawing of lines was pushed out 2 years so that the bubbles at Four Corners, where they have 3 classes at certain grades, where the bulk of those students will have aged into the middle school. You're looking at current enrollment, not projected enrollment in 2 years.
And
Does that answer your question?
So,
Perfect.
so we know that Four Corners has the big bubble. Do we know how much of that bubble is made up of choice students versus students who are currently zoned to go there and would have been zoned to go there in a few years from now even?
I certainly don't off the top of my head, and I don't even know that I have that information
No, because you voted that they could stay there, that really wasn't a population we were focused on.
Well, I was
And the-
just looking at it for just the numerical piece of anticipating, like, okay, these are what the numbers are with the current, but in a world without choice, this is what the numbers would be, just for figuring that out. It's not important, it was just more for context.
So I think really the question is, do you allow students who would be moved to stay in their school of origin? And if you do you continue to provide transportation? Two easy questions, not at all.
It seems like, just having heard the comments from the other committee, we might have an answer for the first part of that question. But when it comes to the transportation issue, it sounded like we were asking for a bit more information that we might not have on hand until the next meeting arrives.
The transportation piece, you are completely accurate. I need to get more information before I can give that to you.
Yeah. Because while we might have principles around it where we would recommend a certain thing based on those, there are also obviously budget affordances we need to be mindful of when it comes to our transportation contract. Jenny?
Just had another thought. And I guess you can't do this one family at a time, and I don't know how many people this actually involves, but this was a long time ago when my kids were little. But if it was an elementary school, I'd have liked them to be at the same school. And do we, if your kindergarten is going to go to a different school, do you is there any thought to talking to the parents when we're going to do the redistricting to see if they're willing to move to where their new little kindergartner is going, if that's what we're doing, which I imagine that would be rather labor intensive. But I get how this is a very problematic thing. And I also think my other thought with all of this is, I know this is a subcommittee of the three of us, kind of the three of us. And then we have Karen and Christine. I hope it's okay if I call you by your first names, but if you have input into what you think is the best idea too, I for one am happy to hear it, because I think they're big choices.
So can I maybe make a recommendation for how we proceed? Because I am mindful of the time. That we entertain a vote now to answer the first part of the question: are we allowing students to age out of their school of origin even after the boundaries are drawn? Basically getting a motion on the table that says, yes, we will be allowing that to happen, and that we sort of table, or whatever the language is that says pending information, to revisit this as a discussion item for the full school committee meeting, the transportation piece of this.
How formal do we need to be? Do you need one of us to pose that as a resolution to vote on, or can we just second what you just said?
I'm not entirely sure how formal we need it to be.
Can I make one minor suggestion?
Yeah.
That you would be making a motion to
recommend
to the full committee.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion now that we recommend to the full school committee that we allow students who would otherwise be affected by the redrawing of the district boundaries to remain in their school of origin and age out.
I will
Second,
second that if
so-
it needs a second.
All, any discussion on that? Any abstentions on that? Any no votes on that?
I am, point of order, Madam, point of order, Chair.
Yep.
I think we may need to do a roll call. I'm
Right.
not sure on that, but I think that
Well,
might be true.
There's three of us, so let's just get to it. Myself, Chair Sexton, I'm a yes. And Member Childs,
I'm a yes as well.
Member Disorder.
Yes.
All right, that is unanimously recommended to the full committee. Woohoo! Democracy triumphs again. And now I don't know if we need to make a motion, but the remainder of that portion of the agenda item related to transportation, we are tabling it to the full committee meeting pending information which will be forthcoming from the district related to the cost and you know, just if our bus company that we've just contracted with can do it. Great. I think that closes out that agenda item for us. Yes. Then let's move right along. I would love for us to go ahead and set up another meeting while we're all together and have our calendars on hand, if that would be possible. And I heard you, Christine, earlier suggesting that it might be helpful for us to do this prior to the next full committee meeting, assuming we get information. It's like sort of like only if we get information.
Yeah, I think maybe we could optimistically pick a date and then I can update you.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
I'm all for holding the time and not needing it rather than needing the time and not having it.
Okay.
Okay, so that would mean that we would want to be meeting again before March 13th. How does Wednesday, March 6th at this exact same time feel to you folks?
I most likely could make it, but I might be running 15 minutes late.
Would 4:30 be amenable to our district folks?
It's okay with me. Karen, does that work? Yeah.
Yes, that works for me.
That works for me as well.
Okay.
That was remarkable. And just to reiterate, that was 4:30 p.m. on Wednesday, March 6th. Then I will make sure to follow up with Lauren to get that posted.
Right.
For that meeting, are there, aside from this one agenda, are there other items that we should plan to talk about at that time? And if anyone thinks of one between now and then, feel free to email me.
I can't think of anything from our perspective right now.
What are the odds that we'll have any sort of a Green River School update? I know it's a lot of paperwork. I'm just trying to figure out when we'll have something for the public because it is something that the public seems very interested in.
Yes.
They do. I don't know. I mean, I'm certainly looking to make a phone call today, but even if I am to get, not today, I apologize, and this week, to make a phone call to find out about process, I have no idea the rate at which the Mass School Business Authority responds to anything. So I'm hopeful to have a little bit more information on process, but I couldn't even hazard when they could reply. Maybe I'll know that part before the next meeting, how long it takes for them to reply. That would be something, right?
That would absolutely be something. Yes.
I'll give it a whirl and see what I can get out of them.
Yeah. And I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
The only other thing I can think of is with what was currently voted on, will the superintendent in the future have any sort of discretion to allow a case-by-case move in the event of, say, a kid whose parent is staff at one school or a kid who's trying to get away from a bullying situation? Like, was the decision made at the full school committee a hard no, or do we have any flexibility for superintendents to make a very much single case decision as needed for student at one school or the other?
As the current superintendent, I believe in students' best interest. I always have some latitude with decision making, but that is my perspective. You know, I guess I don't recall there being an exclusion. Like, I don't think that was restricted, and so
Okay. I just wanted to make sure that if that was restricted, we could get it as an agenda item to come up with some way, because what's the point of having a professional if you can't use professional judgment?
well, I haven't been in a position to do that often, but you know, once or twice, I think in my tenure, I've used my judgment around student placement. So
Okay, well, since there is nothing from the current decision that would impede that in the future, that does not need to be an agenda item.
Huzzah.
okay.
Great.
Are these meetings going to be Zoom? Is that the plan?
I believe so, yes. Is that good with you? You're
Oh, it's perfect. Thank you.
great. All right. With that, I have no other items that are on our agenda for this evening, and I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, disorder.
I guess we probably do need a roll call for that, actually. Chair Sexton, I'm an aye. Member Childs?
Aye.
Member Disorder?
Aye.
We are adjourned at 4:59 p.m.
Thank you, everyone.
Working. I
you,
will
and-
Have a
stop.
great evening.
You too.